Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa joined world leaders for the G7 summit in Quebec, Canada at the weekend. He's told the leaders that he plans to unlock the country's economic potential. Ramaphosa says for decades, South Africa's economy has been constrained by policies of racial exclusion. Econometrix Director and Chief Economist Dr. Azar Jammine joins us for more. Thank you so much, Azar, for your time. Today, what did you make of our return, first of all, to the G7 summit?
Well, I think it was a feather in Ramaphosa's cap and shows that South Africa is being still taken quite seriously, and especially under a new leadership. And it shows that if we do the right things structurally, for people to suddenly start seeing that we are going to potentially make progress in terms of fighting inequality, poverty and unemployment, I think you could start seeing a lot of money flowing into the country. But for the moment, don't get too excited about it.
And let's talk a little bit about that, because again, the message South Africa open for business is the same message that they were taking to Davos. But there's so many things that need to be cleared up here, first of all. And we know that he's made certain key steps, particularly around SOEs and dealing with governance. He's dealing with the size of government. He made that promise, and he's starting to have a look at the different government departments as well. But how much more does he need to do to convince a global investment community?
I think he has to do a tremendous amount more to convince global investors. And they are not stupid, and they know that some structural weaknesses exist in the economy. The two that stand out are the reports, which are valid, of the very poor outcomes of our educational system. Yeah. And the second is the tension that continues to exist in the labour market between the unions and the employers. And of course, that links into the concentration of ownership in the hands, especially of mainly white-owned business. But also, there are other issues that they're looking at that are inimical to them wanting to invest here. And that is, until there's greater certainty around what is meant by land expropriation without compensation, because it's such an emotive issue, and superficially it reeks of interference with property rights. And foreign investors just don't want to know about that.
And he did try and deal with that. He talked about the extreme concentration of ownership of land, saying that that's one of the great impediments to the full realization of our country's potential. But I suppose it's how it's dealt with that's going to communicate a certain message.
Absolutely. And, you know, I participated last week in a roundtable discussion with economists on the whole land reform issue. And there are so many strands to this whole thing. It is very complex, and it's not just a simple black and white issue.
He also, he and the Prime Minister of Canada talked a bit about the mining sector. Obviously, the one thing that's hanging over us is the Charter, the third iteration.
Now, that is the second issue, that we have to get greater certainty there, and we're still dilly-dallying about certain requirements, and foreigners are often also not very fond of being prescribed to as to handing over some of their shareholding to black owners. And that is also acting as a deterrent to investment potentially.
How convincing is a message of South Africa's getting on the right path when we've just had that shocking GDP contraction in the first quarter?
I think foreigners will recognize that those GDP figures could be a statistical aberration. In fact, I believe they are a statistical aberration within a longer-term trend of gradual recovery. They've seen similar types of outcomes in their own countries. But clearly, we're going to have to convince them that we are on the right path. And it's going to be quite a challenge, and it's a long-term process, because we're not going to see economic growth screaming up to 2, 3, 4% in a short space of time. That'll only come about after we have done all these structural reforms.
He's set a very high and tough target for his envoys that he's going to be sending out around the world. What message do you think they need to be sending out to the world?
I think they need to be sending out the idea of the plan of action that we need to take. Much of it is already included in Ramaphosa's own New Deal that he has set out. And furthermore, they need to try and convince the investors that we are on the path of creating greater certainty around land reform and mining charter, for example, and that we are on the path of rooting out corruption and state capture. Ramaphosa has taken a lot of action in that regard, but you know, again, it's a process that's going to take months, if not years, to unravel.
We'll leave it there. Thanks for your time. Today, Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, that's Dr. Azar Jammine.